The French government has collapsed. This is another no confidence vote. This is, I believe, the second, maybe the third time this has happened in recent memory. And we've got Poland requesting NATO assistance from what was a Russian incursion of drones into their airspace. Help us make sense of this, Lucas. What's going on in Europe and in the Middle East?
Well, no surprise to see the government of France collapse. We've talked earlier about the far-right government, the nationalist government or party that is the Marine Le Pen party that's long been festering in and gaining power in French politics, and the broader move towards nationalism across Europe. We had the removal of the Romanian Georgescu earlier this year. This is a fight that I would say began to put the fear in the hearts of of Euro pro Euro politicians across Europe, beginning with Brexit back in 2020 and the lead into Brexit, which, if you recall, surprised everybody around the world when it actually passed. So there has been a backsliding into federal European policies, and those have been concentrated around, conjuring an enemy with Russia.
Well, and this, some are saying, is the herald of Brexit. Do you expect to see that, or should we expect to see the French leaving the European Union? That would be the collapse of the European Union.
I mean, absolutely. We also, let's not forget too that Germany has been coming into elections, and they lost 7 candidates from the far right party to 7 candidates died.
The nefarious death of 7 candidates in the Alternative for Deutschland party, AfD. Like, this is no coincidence. Somebody is cleaning house and killing off their political opponents.
Yeah, no big deal there. So we have expected a collapse of the European Union, or at least NATO, and this shadow era in the wake of Brexit and the move towards nationalization. And we should also bear in mind the history of the euro collapse in the wake of 2008, 2009, the housing collapse, or the housing crisis here in the United States, and how that rippled throughout the world. Well, in Europe, that caused Germany to turn on, or maybe I should say Germany and the other prosperous European nations to turn on the likes of Greece and Spain, the southern European countries. They were very extractive in demanding that those countries pay their dues. And so we've been seeing a shadow of European cooperation since then. And I think this is important to bear in mind whenever we look at the supposed conflict, or not supposed conflict, but the conjured reasons for a conflict with Russia that have risen since that financial tension that rose in the European Union. And I think it's crucial to understand that if we are to get outside of the narrative that Russia is an imminent threat to Europe. I think the real threat to Europe was seen in the wake of that financial collapse, and it was that no forgiveness could be found for countries that were indebted to the richer countries in Europe, and that created a lot of friction between all those countries, and so they turned to more draconian measures of propaganda, of lawfare in keeping nationalist governments out of office. But as France's governments collapse, or they reform a government, I'm not sure how many tricks that they have inside their bag in order to keep out a nationalist government. And I have an expectation that once one national government rises to power in the more prosperous European countries, and by those I think chiefly of Germany, Britain, and France. So if this happens in France, then I would expect that to sort of unleash the European spring. Um, we also know that there's a lot of tension in England, in Britain right now. The flag of England being plastered everywhere. I don't know if you saw the recent Banksy, the Banksy um, painting that showed a judge beating a protester with his gavel. It's been removed, but it's already becoming infamous. So all of this is going on in Europe.
What is the significance of the flags in Britain? This is just a return to nationalism of the British. I mean, they already had a Brexit. They've had a return to nationalism.
Well, but Britain is a imperial, a federal conglomeration of countries with separate identities, Ireland, England, Scotland. And so for the English to begin, and English, and I think it's very important also to realize that the the plastering of the English flag all over England is a complaint against British policies. And what they're really complaining about is the immigration into Britain. And if you're British or English, or if you're tracking, why England has such a large influx of immigrants around the world, it's because as their imperial power failed in their Commonwealth countries or in their former colonies, they tried to create soft power ties by opening up their borders to those specific populations. So as their control of India was failing, they allowed more Indian migration. Jamaica, any number of countries around the world. We've most recently seen that being played out with Western Asian countries, Syria, Iraq, the countries that have been in conflict over there ever since Britain supported under Tony Blair. Britain supported America's misguided wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and and the litany of other countries that we've staged coups in and engaged in wars in. So as that conflict also boils to a head, the European countries, to me, this is what's driving a lot of the nationalism pushback against the sort of the liberal global imperial world order. You could swap out any of those names. But meanwhile, so we have this nationalist rise going on in Europe. We also saw Israel bomb Qatar yesterday, and I think that is also should be raising alarm bells with the desperation and the links that Israel and the United States, or with the support of the United States, are going to the erosion of diplomacy, the erosion of sovereignty that is occurring, because Qatar is a long been very has long worked very hand in hand, or hand in glove, with the United States. We have a large military base there, but I don't know if you caught this news, but the Israeli bombing in Qatar was directed towards the leaders of Hamas, and those leaders in Hamas were negotiating the terms of a ceasefire, or whatever detente was possible with Gaza, between the Palestinian and the Israel genocide that's been going on for so long. They were tipped off, and from what I've heard, and what sounds very credible to me, is they were tipped off by Turkey. So as we also understand that Turkey has barred Israeli aircraft from their airspace and Israeli commerce from Turkish ports, and we go back and remember that the overthrow of Syria was done through an alliance between Israel and Turkey. Um, Things seem to be coming to a point in that region too, and no honor among thieves is a phrase that pops into mind. So I think that we are beginning to see the end game coming to hand with regards to what's going to happen with Turkey, whether it's going to be under Israeli or Turkish control. You, of course, have British interests who are very interested in the region. United States. United States has been, again, working deeply with Qatar and Saudi Arabia. But for the United States to turn on Qatar and allow this bombing to occur, or to give their authorization for Israel to bomb in Qatar, shocked me, and I think that this will drive more of the Gulf states, the Arab Gulf states, together, and drive them towards a deeper alliance with Iran. Because why could they trust the United States if the United States only protects them whenever it's convenient for the United States?
This collapse of the collapse of NATO and whether this is going to happen. What do you expect to see as a response? So Poland invokes Article 4. Does this mean that NATO is bound to respond at this point? They have a NATO nation. Their airspace was violated. Do you expect to see some sort of a response from NATO, or will this be ignored?
I don't expect to see a response from NATO. We have already seen tension from the NATO countries, especially Hungary and Turkey, and beyond that, an actual lack of sufficient weapons, and certainly sufficient troops, and even more so sufficient technology to defeat Russia. So those politicians who are living in a fantasy world and think that they are going to drive a to force the issue with the other countries or NATO, are going to find that the other countries of NATO um, uh, say no, and if they are called upon, if their membership of NATO comes into question, then they'll leave NATO. And to me, the collapse of NATO is going to look more like a whisper, or throwing a party that nobody shows up to.
Just a silent thing that goes away. I mean, we've been talking about whether NATO has any life left in it. We're a little surprised that we didn't hear about NATO in the last press conference that Trump had, but this is the silent whimper, I guess, as NATO just slowly fades into nothingness.
And I've also been concerned that NATO, or the United States, might be using the allegiance of NATO to try to shift the theater of the war from Ukraine into the Balkans, especially into Serbia. I do think that has been attempted. Let's not forget also the heightened conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. But I think that moving the theater farther away from the power centers of Europe gains less traction, and so I think calling it a whimper or a whisper is exactly what we're going to see. We've also seen there was a revolution, or there was an overthrow of the government in Nepal recently, and that comes in the wake of the Kashmiri flare-up between Pakistan and India. This is also, if we want to put a deeper spin on this, going back and maybe to the timeline of Brexit, the the United States interference in the Pakistani government to remove Imran Khan, and furthermore the 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 long amount of time that the United States has spent at war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Um, there was an overthrow of the government in Bangladesh last year. There's an emerging color revolution in Indonesia. So I think that we need to understand that the United States State Department, working with the Pentagon, has a crescendo of conflicts that they throw their cards on the table. They throw many dice at once. But there have been expectations as to the the collapse of NATO, the failure of the failure to win a war against Russia, and so they have been turning to other Asian theaters to create what chaos that they can, and to try to maintain some sort of power with the governments that went out in those areas. So as we see uh, the liberal order folding in Europe, um, I think it's very apparent that the United States State Department has plans for uh, for the rest of Asia, and has been focusing on the countries between India and China, because as we know from the history of American, uh, I hesitate to say diplomacy, American strategy, in our world politics relations after World War II, is to create conflict and strife, and to try to pit the nations or the countries of Asia against each other. And I think this also goes again to a deeper concern about the alliance that is emerging between the quote unquote global south, or maybe Asian countries that we've seen. I don't know if you caught um, the news and the focus on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization recently. But one thing that I always think about when I think about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is that whenever it was being formed, um, in the minds of, shall we say, world diplomats and some of those who were being consulted from the West about its formation, it was a mirroring of the European Economic Corporation, or is it corporation? Community. Sorry, European Economic Community, and the advisors, the Western advisors who were helping the Asian countries form the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, said, "Well, don't you want a military wing? Don't you want the NATO correlation to the EU, so that you can force cooperation and you can have some sort of defense agreement?" And they said, "Absolutely not. That has been corrosive to the Western power structure, and we are going to build the Asian cooperation commerce network without the corrosive politics of military and defense interfering in the bona fide sovereignty that comes with commerce cooperative organizations." Um,
Well, it has. I mean, we haven't really seen NATO marshal much of a military response to anything since World War II, right? I mean, it's just largely been a military organization that hasn't done a whole heck of a lot. Or am I misunderstanding that? Like, whether the Shanghai Cooperation Organization wants a military arm, does it speak to what NATO's actually accomplished militarily, or do they just say because it had the specter of something could happen, that it forced things in a way that were they deemed to be undesirable?
well, I would say but NATO's had a much deeper effect on European politics than the European Union, and that hasn't been seen up until Bill Clinton, 1992, post Soviet era, as as any amount of military force. But you know to me, this if we go back to how the United States engaged with the rest of the world coming out of World War II, the first uh, the first plan that the United States put forth was the Morgenthau Plan. And Morgenthau was the treasurer under FDR, and he wanted to make sure that Europe was agrarian and did not have the economic power to muster the militaries that they had used to go to war to each other with each other and draw everyone into that war. And it was the military that was left over in Europe that turned to President Truman at this time, because FDR had passed away, and said, these people are starving. There is going to be catastrophe, famine, probably a meaner political strife that lasts for 50 or 100 years here, and so we need to turn around and help them. And thus the Marshall Plan. Truman did not want it named after himself because he was so unpopular at the time. He named it after a general, the general that the most popular general, and the general that was operating on behalf of the military in Europe. But when the military convinced the United States politicians to create this Marshall Plan, they created a very corrosive organization, NATO, that was where the actual power base in Europe emanated from. And this has been destabilizing to European organization, and this to me, this has held up Europe in the wake of that, because it made the European countries beholden at the creation of this military organization, so directly through force, to the United States. And we were permitted or allowed to put a number of military bases across Europe, and to foster this defensive organization. Well, the organization wasn't actually defensive; it was offensive, and it required a great bogeyman in order to function. And I would say this is the actual reason that we had a Cold War that came out of World War II, because the Soviet Union, one, was not allowed. We've seen in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russians saying, "Hey, we want to be part of that defensive organization too," and the response from America and NATO was, "No, you can't be in it. No, you can't be in it." And Russia says, "Well, how come?" And they say, "Well, because we need an enemy, because we need an enemy." And in one hand they say, well, the enemy is not necessarily Russia, it's just an imaginary enemy. But whenever you look at the politics of NATO, the actual enemy has always been Russia. So NATO, this vestigial organization that emerged from the leftover troops that were left over in Europe after World War II, has been unable to allow political reorganizations and democratic voices to rise up, and allow alliances to fluctuate, allow alliances to actually arise between Germany and Russia, who need each other. Germany for their industrial production, and Russia for its resources of natural gas and oil. Instead, the geopolitical alliance has been forged based on the proximity of these countries, and this is why.
And now we have the realignment. Now Russia is being seen as not necessarily the great enemy. We have alliances being formed with Russia, and I'm still curious that we have these sanctions happening on Russia that are supposedly stopping the flow of oil, but are largely deemed as completely ineffective. Oil is flowing to the people who want to buy it. This is allowing Russia to continue to have the funds to do what they please. Are we seeing a shift where Russia is no longer the bogeyman, the enemy?
I mean, I think yes, we are certainly seeing a shift, and part of this collapse in France is we're about to see it actually being, gaining political power in the countries of Europe. I worry that it might be too late. Um, uh, why would Russia continue to trust or to believe um, that NATO is finished, that a military alliance, and let's not forget too that when you bring up these sanctions, the military alliance allowed things like Operation Gladio. Where the United States was creating dollars, what we would later call the euro dollars, and giving them to the politicians that were cooperating with NATO. Um, so we also have to understand when we talk about the military industry complex and the international cooperation of this military industry complex. Well, these are the inadvertent actions that set up the structure for this all to occur. So um, Russia, the creation of BRICS in the wake of, again, 2008, 2009, it was not just hard on Europe, it was hard on the rest of the world, because the United States was creating, adding to the supply of dollars, but in order to maintain the price level so that there was not immediate price inflation in the United States at the time, the method to control the price inflation in the United States was to send all of these dollars that had been created out into the other countries of the world. And when there was a great retraction of trust and faith in that system, which is actually a zero reserve system, instead of allowing institutions and financial institutions and businesses to fail in the United States, we took all that money back from the rest of the world. We sucked it out of the rest of the world. And those countries, and even the BRICS, the BRICS acronym was created as the name of an investment portfolio of emerging markets in the rest of the world. And those were the countries that were directly affected by the retraction of dollars into their systems. So, and then when you layer upon that the unfair manipulation of, say, the player at the monopoly board who's in charge of the bank, for them not only to be taking money out of the pockets of certain players, uh, whenever there is a collapse, but then for them also to be saying, well, we're not going to let you sell your land. We're not going to let you sell your hotels. That's what they tried to do, to that has eroded trust in not just the dollar, but also trust in the United States. So in the wake of all of that, they've created their own system, and not only have they created their own, money transmission networks, and are now sort of approaching the actual creation of some shared common currency, going back to a call by I believe it was the Brazilian president maybe about a month ago, a return to this focus on creating a BRICS currency, but also look at the cooperation between Russia and China. And Russia has now shaken hands on a deal to create a pipeline that goes not to Europe to sell their oil and gas, but to go to China instead. And this is the real the real defeat of a relationship between Russia and Europe. If Russia is selling its resources to China and has a growing and an emergency ecosystem of commerce between them and other Asian countries, why are they going to care about Europe? Um, and so I would say that has been, the announcements of the likes of a pipeline sending gas into China um, should cause a lot of worry for Europeans about what their prospects for industrial power, and being true manufacturing countries is going to look like in the future.
Anything else that we need to consider with the kind of the political wrap up of what's going on in the world right now? There's certainly a lot here that we are considering.
One, I would say we have a history of thinking about Europe as separate from Asia. But I think that a dependency or a rise in power of the main Asian continent is going to beggar Europe and send them send upcoming governments into trying to secure more deals with Western Asian countries for their gas, uh, and also to turn and to turn and rely more on the likes of Russia and especially China. The one place that we haven't mentioned in sort of an overview of geopolitics around the world is South America. And we have talked in the past a little bit about the United States sort of the new focus on Venezuela and the narrative of drugs in the United States as being a problem. Um, but I think we should also bear in mind. I don't know if you saw the I believe she was an army officer, but she was talking about the coups that had failed in South America in the last year that were with concerns towards lithium reserves. And we talked about it briefly when it occurred, but Paraguay had an attempted a very poorly a very poorly constructed color revolution that they put down in Asuncion. And we also saw Elon Musk going down to Argentina to ink deals with Javier Milei, the supposedly libertarian or uh, the president of Argentina. We're seeing a collapse of grand proportions in Argentina. The United States turning the brute force of our military towards northern South America, and I think that we're going to see the United States continue to shift our military focus towards South America, where they can maybe conjure up some sort of narrative of a win, of a continuance of American dominance, American primacy, American power, and that will be a convenient shift of our attention as the Asian the Asian continent power structure resettles. We still haven't talked about Africa. That's a whole nother story. But I think that in America, we should be wary of this narrative of drugs from Venezuela, drugs from Mexico. We also know from if we dig into the policies of the United States State Department, the likes of the CIA, that the same covert money and power structure that was established by the Marshall Plan, the creation of NATO, has also been built in more shoddy ways around the world. And the creation of that, harken back to older American and British abuses of sovereignty through the drug trade. So we should remember, I guess in short, that the drug trade from Mexico, from Colombia, from Venezuela is actually a creature that's created and managed by the United States clandestine government operations. And I'll end it there.
And we'll see you next time on FOMO.